Over the previous 3 sessions, we've explored writing to files on your server by creating log files, reading from files on your server by looking up data on a server file, uploading files to your server as a picture for a traveler, and creating new files on your server by reading a model file, updating it with values from the form, and writing the updated data as a new file. We're pretty close to creating a whole app on your website, an application form and a web page, and a PHP CGI program to apply the user-submitted data to create a web page for the applicant. But there are some loose ends to examine. We need to create our Travelers page, Travelers.shtml, containing a table of all travelers who've signed up. And then whenever we get a new applicant, we need to make an entry on that page. Also, we may need to manually adjust text entries. I'd also like to take this opportunity to introduce the PHP switch construct and discuss the handling of gender. Let's get to it. Recall our Travelers page looks like this. So the basic page structure and style are in keeping with our other pages. Exactly what you want to do. It helps the user to have a consistent look and feel to the extent possible across all the pages on your site. The center of the page is a 3-column table. The first column consisting of the traveler's name and a picture if supplied. The second column consists of the email address, and the third column is their phone number. Notice there is a blank row between the trip leader's entries and the other travelers. The non-trip leader travelers are listed in alphabetical order by last name, and within that first name. Each picture is a link to the corresponding traveler's personal page. Each email address is a link that will bring up the user's email client if it is clicked. If no picture is supplied, the text "no photo" is the link. And then after the table is a link that allows you to set up an email to all the travelers. So we can start by coding our usual pieces. Because we keep the style of the pages pretty much the same across the whole site, then coding individual pages has at least a similar structure every time we look at it. So here's a very common structure that we've seen before. Then in the content column, we have some instructional notes, and then we have our table, starting with the table class equals solid black border and a caption element, and then a row with 3 data elements, which basically are the column headers. And then here is the entry for the first trip leader and the second trip leader. And then these 3 TD elements is what constructs the horizontal line after the trip leaders. And then we go on with similar information for all of the travelers. Then what I like to do in the middle of the table definition is have a comment which has a model role. And then when we get a new person to sign up, all I need to do, copy, so Control-C, and put this where it belongs alphabetically, and Control-P for paste, and then fill in the blanks as it were. After the model entry, we have the table end tag, a blank line, and a setup to include the email addresses of every traveler. Again, when we have a new traveler sign up, I manually add their email address to this list. Finally, we have the usual end-of-page lines. Now let's examine this a little more deeply. First, we have a number of style classes that are defined in our travelstyle.css file, so I've included these definitions here. For the table, we have class equals solid black border, and so here's the definition of that, and this is how it shows up for the table. Each entry has a border around it, and adjacent borders are combined. They collapse. Just as a reminder, here's what it looks like when border collapse is separate. We've set caption to have red, font weight bold, font size 12 point, and margin bottom 3 millimeters, so that ends up as shown. Now for the row with the column header texts, they all have TBL HD photo, which basically is just set for width of 155 pixels. And each row has 3 columns with these styles. The first column is td.tbl content photo. Its height is 140 pixels, the vertical align is middle, and the text align is center. So that's what it's going to look like when it's rendered. The TBL content name, which has the email address, it'll just say padding left 2 pixels, and the TBL content phone, which holds the phone number, will have a padding left of 6 pixels. Notice also in the model row, I hardcode the height equals 160. As with the personal web page, the browser will take this value and calculate the width, keeping the original image height to width ratio when it renders the image. It is certainly possible to extend your CGI to include updating the Travelers page at the same time you create a new applicant's personal web page. But it turns out this is rather tricky to code this functionality, whereas doing it by hand doesn't take long at all. Whether to add this capability in the CGI code might depend on the volume of applications you experience, as well as your algorithm for how to order the entries in the table. For example, members of a family traveling together might not all have the same last name, so how do you want to order them in the table? Manually adjusting text entries. Once data has been entered by the user, I usually leave it alone unless the user requests a change by email. This means, for example, I don't fix spelling or grammar errors that I spot on my own initiative. I'm more than happy to make updates on request, but so far at least I've resisted letting the user manipulate their own web page online in real time. For one thing, you don't want to do this until you've installed some kind of user ID password authentication method. You don't want just anyone changing what's in a page. And we discuss how to accomplish this in a later lesson. Also, leaving text as entered displays a little bit about the person themselves. Another thing to be aware of is how data are handled. For example, in our application for the trip to Japan, a user might enter this, so it looks like 2 paragraphs there. But when this is displayed in the personal web page, it would look like this. Notice that what the user had entered as 2 paragraphs is displayed as a single paragraph. This is simply how your browser formats text from a text area type control. Now, sometimes you can tell that the user intended to display some text as a list of bullet points, and I've been known to sometimes edit the text by adding BR tags, and maybe even a leading asterisk on each line. But that's actually a bit risky. You may be misinterpreting what the user had in mind. Also note that if you edit the HTML for the private page, you might see the data is physically stored like this. So you see the line break there. Again, this is just a function of how the text is stored internally. It still displays just as shown above. The PHP switch construct. At one point in our CGI, we were checking out a value returned from the getImageSize function. You may recall this code. If $pic not equal to quote quote, $hold equals getImageSize of $_files pic tmp name. Now, if $hold, then we set $pic OK to true and $type to hold bracket 2. Then we have a series of if statements, if $type equals 1, if $type equals 2, and so forth, and then if $pic file type equals quote quote. This is actually somewhat inefficient because each if statement reevaluates the compare of $type. A more efficient way to do this when you have multiple compares against the same variable or expression is to use switch. The idea is to indicate the variable or expression you're looking at. For example, switch parenthesis $type. And then code a series of case statements where you specify what action to take if the value in the switch matches the value for the case. For a concrete example, we start as we had before, but now after we've set $type to a $hold of bracket 2, we say switch of $type. Case 1, $pick file type equals GIF. Case 2, $pick file type equals JPG. Case 3, $pick file type equals PNG. Case 6, $pick file type equals BMP. So the value in $type is evaluated just once, and that value is compared against each case value. If there is a match, then statements after the case are executed. Problem: once there is a match, all following statements are executed, even statements in the following case tests. Yikes. Solution: the break statement exits the switch construct, so the better solution is, and here's our construct again, but you notice the second statement after each case is break. Break says leave the switch construct. Notice you don't need braces to offset the statements under each case. But now another problem arises. What if none of the case values are a match? Well, nothing has changed, and that may be sufficient, but you can explicitly execute statements if there's no match by using default. So here, after the case 6 test, I add a new one, default. And default will be executed if none of the cases are true. In that case, I'm setting $pick OK to be false. And this works like a champ, and it's more efficient than a series of if tests against the same variable or expression. Note, it's not a noticeable change in performance if you've got a low volume of applicants, but as the number of simultaneous invokers grows, you could see the difference between a series of ifs and the switch construct. Handling of gender and more. Although I've labeled this section as relating to gender, there are some broader points I'd like to include here. First, to maximize data security and privacy, don't ask for data you don't need and won't use. It sounds simple, but I've seen a propensity to include in forms input requests for data that your application won't use. Some people like to ask just in case we need it later. Don't do that. For every control in your form, you should have a legitimate reason for asking for it. Can you specify exactly how you will use it? It only seems fair that instead of just telling you to do something, I should demonstrate how I do it in a particular circumstance. So here goes. First part of our form, first name and last name are required. We need a way to identify our travelers and to create our file names. Gender is optional, but if specified, we only allow uppercase M and uppercase F. In most cases, it's not necessary. However, here are two situations that might be useful. For student exchanges, a host family may only want a boy or a girl. Note that many first names these days can be ambiguous, so in this case, I make this field required. Also, for regular trips, people traveling alone may wish to room with another traveler in order to avoid single supplement charges. In this case, it would be helpful to know the gender of both parties. Possibility, provide a checkbox indicating if a traveler is interested in finding a roommate. Or, if omitted, we could flag this field with gender not specified and modify our CGI to create a slightly different result. And we have an example later. Birth date is optional. In some touring situations, there may be times when there are age limitations, not allowed for people younger than a certain age or not for people over a certain age. So make this required then. Also, might want to make sure you celebrate birthdays of travelers on the trip. Email address is required. Everyone must be reachable by email for regular communications, special notices, and so forth. Picture file is optional, used so travelers and trip leaders learn to recognize their fellow travelers, but certainly not required. How they heard about the trip is optional. This is not saved in the personal web page, but just passed on to the webmaster. It might be useful in determining how best to promote future trips. Possible trip extensions. This is optional with a default of no. Again, this is not stored in the personal web page, but it is useful information for trip planners when looking at itineraries. For example, how will we connect and/or when will they be leaving the group? For contact information, the street address. If you'll be mailing tickets or other documents to the applicant, then this will be required. But if you don't need it, don't ask for it. Phone number. Here I've set it as required to have at least one phone number. This is useful for calls or texts, especially if there's a quick change in plan. Additional phone numbers are optional. Past visits is optional, might be interesting for fellow travelers and especially trip leaders. Language skills is optional. It might be helpful for trip leaders to know, and if planning on running some pre-trip orientation sessions, this might also be useful. I'm thinking mostly student exchanges here, but it could apply to adult trips too. Other connections is optional. Might be interesting to trip leaders, especially in terms of helping travelers to connect, or even using their connections for the group experience. What you hope to get from the trip is optional, possibly useful for trip leaders in planning some details of the itinerary. What to share about your work is optional, possibly interesting for other travelers in finding common interests among the travelers. Describe your immediate family is optional, again, possible insights that could forge connections within the group. And interests or hobbies, also optional, again, possible insights that could forge connections within the group. So you see, for example, you could streamline the process by eliminating all the fields designated as optional, but you might be missing information that could help the group connect or gel, or that would provide insights for the trip leader. Now, so far we've asked for gender on our application form, but we've not made it required. So the CGI might find the value as M or F or not specified. Some forms might add an option prefer not to answer, or imply that by simply making this field not required. Now I've put an additional construct on our personal page. At the top of the page, next to the traveler's name, add the gender as *** first space *** last space parenthesis *** gen. Then in the CGI code, if gender was not specified, I use gender not specified to replace *** gen. And for the pronoun, I assign they. It works grammatically, so I'm happy with that. Turns out this is not so simple to do right, so here's the pieces I had to put together. In the application form, I set the default value for gender as space, quote, space, quote. In the onSubmit routines, I uppercased the gender value. So if they provided a lowercase f, I made it an uppercase F, and same for M. And if they had nothing specified, I made sure it was a space. Then in modeltraveler.txt, I added an additional replacement indicator, as I mentioned a moment ago. Then in the PHP CGI, I made a number of changes. First of all, I initialized $pronoun and $gen. So $pronoun defaults to he and $gen to male. And then if $gender equals uppercase F, then pronoun equals she and $gen equals female. And then finally, if $gender not equal to M and $gender not equal to F, then $pronoun equals they and $gen equals gender not specified. Then after replacing the first and last names, I replace gender. Then generating the email message to the webmaster took some extra work to get the resulting syntax working right English-wise. So after closing the files, in $message I have contact $first, $last at email equals, phone equals, and view new page at. And that's all what we had before, but it's a matter of the order of things. And then I say if $pronoun equals they, make $who equals they are. Otherwise, make $who $pronoun is. Now we go if ext2 equals yes, then we assign ext2 to $who plan an additional travels. So that will either be they are or he is or she is. Similarly, for the else clause, $ext2 equals $who not planning additional travels. And based on the work we did just a moment ago, that will make sense grammatically in English. And then $message equals $message dot, in other words, concatenated with new line $ext2. And then finally, if $ref not equal to quote quote, then $ext3 equals how dot lc first $who heard about the trip, and that's similar to what we did before. And then we're done. In this session, we tied up some loose ends by demonstrating creating a Travelers.shtml page, discussing how to add new entries to a Travelers.shtml page, discussing whether or not to correct text entries from an applicant, and showing how text may show up in code. And we also introduced the switch construct, suggested you define the reason and use behind gathering every piece of data on a form, and demonstrated one way to handle gender options. In the next lesson, we begin an exploration of handling relational databases in PHP. See you there.